So now there are two real interest rate, okay, because of the inflation. Okay, so one inflation is actual inflation rate, which is not known until it has occurred, because it will happen in the future. And the second is the expected inflation rate. So expected inflation rate we will expect now. So I can expect that after 1 year inflation rate would be 10%. Okay, but then actually maybe after 1 year the actual inflation rate may not be 10%. It can be more than 10% or it can be less than 10%. Okay, so the expected inflation rate can be greater than actual inflation rate, or it can be less than actual inflation rate, or it can be equal to actual inflation rate. So it depends how we are forming our expectations. And we form our expectations on the basis of past experience. Like, past experience के basis पे you can say something about future. Okay, so if suppose if we see the rising trend of prices, then we can expect that in future the prices will also increase and there would be inflation in the economy. So same is with other expectations. So because we have now two inflation, so this is actual inflation, this is expected inflation. Okay, this is the nominal interest rate. Okay, nominal interest rate minus the expected inflation would be the X earned real interest rate. And this is the real interest rate people expect at the time they buy a bond or take out a loan. So if I am expecting that the inflation rate would be 10% in future and the nominal interest rate is 15%, so this means my X earned real interest rate is 5%. Okay, and if actually suppose the inflation rate is 8% rather than 10%, so then 15 minus 8 would be 7. So my export's real interest rate would be 7%. So real interest rate actually is the interest rate which is actually realized. Okay, so this X earned and X post real interest rate is simply because of the inflation rate, expected inflation rate and actual inflation rate. Then we have money demand. Okay, so in the quantity theory of money, the demand for real money balances depends on the real income, okay, which is the transaction demand for money. Now there is another determinant of money demand, which is the nominal interest rate. So this is the opportunity cost of holding money, okay, instead of bonds or any other interest bearing assets. So if you are holding money, so there is a cost of holding money, which is the opportunity cost of holding money. So this means you have foregone the interest rate that can be paid on the bond or other interest bearing assets. So if I am holding suppose 1 lakh rupees cash, and if the interest rate is 10%, so this means the opportunity cost of holding that 1 lakh rupees cash is the 10% interest rate which is foregone on bond or interest bearing assets. So I can convert my 10 lakh rupees, 1 lakh rupees cash into bond or any other interest bearing assets, and then I can get return. So when the interest rate is increasing, so this means this will become more costly to hold cash, okay, to hold money. So people will try to convert their cash into interest-bearing assets, and they will try to hold less money. Okay, but if the interest rate is low, so then this means it is less costly to hold money. So then people will hold more money. So there exists a negative relationship between the money demand and the nominal interest rate, and there exists a positive relationship between money demand and real income. So if real income increases, okay, so real income is the real output. So this means now more goods and services are available, and to make transactions you need more money. Therefore, demand for money will increases. So if real income decreases, real output is low, so then there will be low transactions, and then there will be low demand for money. So there is a negative relationship between nominal interest rate and money demand, and there is a positive relationship between real income and money demand. This is the money demand function. Okay, so this is real money balances, real demand for money, which is a function of nominal interest rate and real income or output. Okay, so this is real money demand, which depends on nominal interest rate negatively, which is the originally cost of holding money, and this depends positively on the real income or real output. So higher in real income, more spending, so there will be more need for money, and then there will be more demand for money for transaction purpose. And L is used for the money demand function because money is the most liquid asset. So there are many other assets, but money is the most liquid asset because you can make it for transaction immediately. Because if you are holding bond, so you cannot make a transaction with bonds. So you have to convert that asset into cash, and then you can make transaction. But if you are holding money, if you are holding cash, you can directly make transaction. Same is with the gold. Gold is another asset with which you cannot make transaction nowadays. Okay, you have to convert gold into cash, and then you can make transaction. Therefore, money is considered as the most liquid asset. And when people are deciding whether to hold money or bond, they don't know what inflation will turn out to be. So that's why nominal interest rate equals to real interest rate plus expected inflation, because interest rate equals nominal interest rate minus inflation rate, which could be expected inflation. So from this we can get real interest rate equals uh, nominal interest rate minus inflation rate. So nominal interest rate would be real interest rate plus inflation rate, and we are taking expected inflation because we don't know what inflation will turn out to be in future. So for nominal interest rate is relevant for money demand, which is real interest rate plus expected inflation rate. Now, when there would be equilibrium in the money market, when the demand for money equals the supply of money. So real demand for money equals real supply of money. So this is the real demand for money, okay, and this should be equal to real supply of money, okay. So then we can write here real supply of money, and this is the real demand for money, and this is the equilibrium. This shows equilibrium in the money market. So this is the real supply of money balances, this is real money demand, okay, this part. Then how this money supply, which is a nominal money supply, would be determined in the long run. So central bank will determine this money supply, and this is exogenous. Okay, so this is nominal money supply and this is price level. So nominal money supply divided by price level is real money supply. Okay. Now this nominal money supply is determined by the central bank. So in case of Pakistan, State Bank of Pakistan will determine the nominal money supply. Then the real interest rate, and this would be determined through loanable fund market, through the supply of loanable fund and demand for loanable fund, through the saving and investment. The saving is the supply of loanable fund and investment is the demand for loanable fund. So when saving equals investment, okay, there is equilibrium in the loanable fund market, and this will determine the equilibrium real interest rate, which we discussed in our previous chapter. And the real output, this is the real output. This is determined by the factors of production and technology. So real output in the long run is determined by the capital stock and labor force, and with some state of technology. So real output is determined by the production function, where output is a function of capital and labor and technology. And technology is exogenous because this is classical model. And then price will adjust to make equilibrium here, okay, in the money market. So whenever there is disequilibrium, so this means price will make adjustment. So for given values of this are real interest rate, real output, and expected inflation rate, a change in M causes P to change by the same percentage, just like in the quantity theory of money. As we discussed in the quantity theory of money, there exists a direct and proportional relationship between money supply and prices. So here again, there is a change in M causes a proportional change in P to keep equilibrium in the money market. So whenever we change money supply, okay, it will change the price level. Then what about the expected inflation? So over the long run, people don't consistently over or under forecast inflation. So on the average, the expected inflation rate would be equal to the actual inflation rate. Okay. And in the short run, expected inflation may be different. Okay. And then as people get new information, they change their expectations. Okay. So that's why in the long run, the expected inflation on the average would be equal to actual inflation. Now, this is the example. If central bank announces it will increase money next year, people will expect next year prices to be higher. So expectation will change about inflation. So they will revise their expectation about inflation upward. Okay. So this affect, price now, even though money hasn't changed yet. So that's why, central bank, they don't announce what would be their money supply growth rate. Because as they announce it, then people will change their expectation. If today central bank says that in 2021, our money supply growth rate would be 15%. So this means immediately today people will change their expectation about inflation, and then they will expect that the future inflation rate would be 15%. Okay, that's why central bank, they don't announce, they keep it confidential, the money supply growth rate. So when the year is passed, then they disclose what was the money supply growth rate in the last year. So they don't announce their policy for the future money supply growth rate because people will change their expectations. Then how price will respond to this expected change in inflation for a given values of real interest rate, real output, and money supply. If this increases, if expected inflation increases, the nominal interest rate will also increase because of the Fisher effect. Through Fisher effect, we know that there exists a direct relationship between nominal interest rate and inflation rate. So if inflation rate is increasing, nominal interest rate will also increase. If you remember, we discussed in Fisher effect last chapter. So when interest rate is increasing, nominal interest rate is increasing, and because there is a negative relationship between demand for money and nominal interest rate, so money demand will decrease. Okay, and then price will adjust. So price will increase to make this real money supply to fall to re-establish equilibrium in the money market. So this is the case. How price will keep the money market equilibrium whenever there is disequilibrium in the money market. Then why is inflation bad? Because there are costs. Okay, so there are costs which is imposed by inflation on the society. You can just think if the inflation rate is high, then fixed income group they will suffer. Okay, salaried class because they are getting fixed salary, and now if inflation rate is increasing, then it means they are losing their purchasing power. Okay, and also it will affect the lender and borrower, and if there is inflation, this will increase uncertainty in the economy. Okay, so there is a common misperception. It is said that inflation reduces real wages. This is true only in the short run because in the short run, wages are fixed by contract. So rigidity in wage is there. So they are not flexible. Suppose if there is increase in price, now if there is increase in inflation, so our salary will not immediately increase. Okay, so this will reduce our real wages. Okay, and this will result decrease in purchasing power. But this is happen in the short run because in the short run the wages are fixed by contract. But in the long run, nominal wages will also change. So the real wage is determined by the labor supply and the marginal product of labor, not the price level or inflation rate. So you have to consider that thing. Cost when inflation is expected. So there are social cost of inflation, which fall into two categories: the cost when inflation is expected and cost when inflation is different than people had expected. Because when we have actual inflation figure also, then we can see the cost would be different. So what we were thinking about in future inflation rate, if the actual inflation rate is same, then the cost of inflation would be same. But if the future inflation rate is different from what we were expecting, then the cost will be different. There is a shoe leather cost of inflation. Okay, and this is the cost and inconveniences of reducing money balances to avoid the inflation tax. Okay, so when inflation increases, so it between nominal interest rate will increase and real money balances will decrease. So people will hold less cash. So there will be less cash holding, and then people will prefer to convert their cash into interest-bearing assets. Okay. So, so in the long run, inflation does not affect real income or real spending. So same monthly spending, but lower average money holding means more frequent trips to bank to withdraw a smaller amount of cash. Okay, so this is the shoe leather cost. So if suppose I'm I'm expecting that inflation rate will not will be same over the whole month, then I will take suppose my salary at once from the bank. But if I'm expecting that inflation rate would be different, so I will make frequent trips to the bank to withdraw my salary. So this is a cost, okay, to visit the ATM or to visit the bank to withdraw the cash. This cost is the shoe leather cost. Then we also have menu cost. Okay, so you see that there are some restaurant and there are some other places where they print menu. Okay, and the cost is mentioned there. But if there is a change in inflation rate, so then they have to change the menu, and there is a menu cost. Okay, and this is the cost of changing prices. Okay, in the past, there were uh, printed menus, but now we have digital menus, so that cost is low. But in the past, that cost is high. If you go to some restaurant, there was, a book that contain different prices of different items. Okay, and if there is a change in the prices, then it means they have to change the menu. They have to print a new menu. So cost of printing new menus and cost of printing and mailing new catalogs. So higher is inflation, the more frequently firm must change their prices and incur these costs. And there are also relative price distortion, which is another cost of expected inflation. So the firm facing menu cost change prices infrequently. So a firm issues new catalog, suppose each January, uh, as the general price level rises throughout the year, the firm relative price will fall. So different firms change their prices at different times, leading to relative price distortion. So maybe some firm they are not changing, and some firm they are changing the prices. So the relative prices would be different, and there will be a relative price distortion, and this will cause macroeconomic inefficiencies in the allocation of resources. And because of inflation, also we have unfair tax treatment. So some taxes are not adjusted to account for inflation, such as the capital gain tax. So if you say there is a 10% capital gain tax, now this means if your capital gain is 1 lakh rupees, then you have to pay 10,000 as capital gain tax. But suppose the inflation rate is also 10%. So this means your real capital gain is zero, but still you have to pay 10% capital gain tax. So this means that there is unfair tax treatment with such inflation rate. Okay, January 1st, you buy $10,000 worth of IBM stock. 31st January, you sell the stock 11,000. So your nominal capital gain is $1,000 or 10%. Inflation rate is 10% during the year, so your real capital gain is zero. But still you have to pay taxes. okay, on your nominal gain, which is a loss. And there are general inconvenience. So inflation make it harder to compare nominal values from different time periods. This complicate long-range financial planning. So it will be difficult to do financial planning if there is high inflation in the economy. Okay, there is also arbitrary redistribution of purchasing power. Uh, Many long-term contracts not indexed, but based on short-term expected inflation. So if actual inflation turn out different from expected inflation, then some people will gain and other people will lose. Okay, and we have the example of borrowers and lenders. So if actual inflation is greater than expected inflation, then it means purchasing power is transferred from lender to borrower because the real interest rate would be lower than the future what we were expecting. Okay, so our actual real interest rate would be lower than the expected real interest rate. So this means uh, lenders will lose and borrower will gain. And if this is the case, if the actual inflation rate is less than expected inflation rate, then purchasing power is transferred from borrowers to lenders. And then we have some additional cost of inflation. If there is inflation in the economy, as we are experiencing these days in our country, so it will create increased uncertainty in the economy. So when inflation is high, it is more variable and unpredictable. So we cannot predict. Okay, wow. And the actual inflation turn out to be different from expected inflation more often, and the differences tend to be larger. So there will be arbitrary redistribution of wealth, just like we discussed for the borrower and lender. So there will be arbitrary redistribution of wealth from borrower to lender or lender to borrower, and this create high uncertainty. And there are risk averse people, and there are people who like risk. So making risk averse people worse off in case of higher inflation. And there's one benefit of inflation: nominal wages are rarely reduced uh, in the economy, even when equilibrium real wages fall. So this hinders labor market clearing. So inflation allows real wages to reach equilibrium level without nominal wage cut. Okay, therefore, moderate inflation improves the functioning of the labor market. This is dangerous if we have hyperinflation in the economy. Okay, so inflation, moderate inflation, single-digit inflation is okay. But if the inflation enters into double digit or triple digit, then this is dangerous because then people will lose their confidence on the monetary units, and people will not prefer to hold cash, and they return to barter trade, direct exchange of goods and services, or they will try to use some other currency which is a stable currency, it's foreign currency. So that's why hyperinflation is not good. So if inflation rate is more than 50% per month, this is per month, then we say there is hyperinflation. So all the cost of moderate inflation described above become huge under hyperinflation. And then money ceases to function as a store of value, as a medium of exchange, and as a unit of account. So people will not prefer to hold money. People will not prefer to use money as a medium of exchange. People will not prefer to keep money as a store of value, because if you keep money as a store of value, then if there is hyperinflation, then you will lose your entire purchasing power. So then, if there is hyperinflation in the economy, then people will conduct their transaction with direct exchange of goods and services. So there will be a barter system, okay, or they will use some stable foreign currency. Then, what causes hyperinflation in the economy? This is money supply growth rate, okay. So hyperinflation is caused by excessive money supply growth rate. So if your money supply growth rate is high, so you know that it will be transformed into inflation rate. So your inflation rate will also be high. So when the central bank print money, the price level rises, and if it prints money rapidly enough, the result is hyperinflation. This is the data for few example of hyperinflation. So you can see from 1983 to 85 in Israel, this was the money supply growth rate 295% and inflation rate was 275%. Poland, this is the money supply growth rate and it is inflation rate 344% and then 400%. So as money supply growth rate is higher, we can see that inflation rate is also. Look at Bolivia in 1984-85, money supply growth rate was 4,208% and the inflation rate was 6,515%. Just you can imagine, if this is the inflation rate, then who will trust the money? So people will lose their trust on local currency. So they will not prefer to use it as a medium of exchange, as a unit of account, as a store of value. So they will return to barter system or they will prefer to use some foreign currency for transaction purpose. So why government create hyperinflation? So when the government cannot raise taxes, sell bond, so they will print money. Okay, if you cannot raise, because the government has to make expenditure. Now the question is from where to finance this expenditure? You have to get revenue. If you cannot raise revenue through taxes, so then it means central government will ask central bank to print money. So they will print more money and then this will result in inflation in the economy. So in theory, the solution to hyperinflation is very simple. Just stop printing money. So if you reduce the money supply growth rate, then inflation rate will also decrease. But again, in real world, this requires drastic and painful fiscal constraint. So if for this, you have to increase your taxes or you have to reduce your expenditures. Government. So government need to reduce government expenditure, government need to increase taxes, and these are painful. So if you are reducing your expenditures, suppose if you are making infrastructure development and you are not making that expenditure, so infrastructure deterioration will start, okay? And if you raise taxes, again, it will create trouble for the government. Maybe government will not be elected next time, okay? This would be a problem. Okay, there are problem that government has to face if they are not printing money. And then we have classical dichotomy. Okay, so real variables that are measured in physical units quantities and relative prices. For example, the quantity of output produced and the real wages, output earned per hour of worker, and real interest rate, output earned in the future by lending 1 unit of output today. So in classical model, real variables matters. Okay, so if someone says your wages has increased, so immediately we will ask what happened, whether real wages has increased or nominal wages. So if nominal wages has increased and prices also increased, so it means there is not, if the proportion of increase is same, so it means there is no change in real wages, there is no change in purchasing power. Okay, so that's why in classical model, real variables matters, real output matters. If nominal output increases, we don't know, maybe that increase in nominal GDP is because of increase in prices. So same is with the real interest rate. We are interested to get positive real interest rate, because maybe nominal interest rate is 10%, but inflation rate is 12%. Then it means real interest rate is -2%. So our returns is negative. So nominal variable measure in money units. Okay, nominal wage, dollar per hour work, and then nominal interest rate, dollars earned in future by lending $1 today, and the price level, the amount of dollar needed to buy a representative basket of goods. So real variables were explained in chapter 3 and nominal in chapter 4. Okay, and the classical dichotomy is that this is the theoretical separation of nominal and real variables in the classical model, which implies nominal variables do not affect real variables. Okay, and there is a neutrality of money. Changes in money supply do not affect real variable. So if you increase money supply, then real output will not increase according to classical model, because they said that real output will increase if there is increase in labor force, increase in capital stock, or improvement in technology. So if we are increasing money supply, so real output will not increase in the long run. Okay, only the inflation rate will increase. Okay, prices will increase. So in the real world, money is approximately neutral in the long run.